I-V-M.
I want to thank Intel for supporting our show. Do you remember last year when we spoke about how the Intel vPro platform is built for business? Well, I'm glad to say we've kicked it up a notch. That's right, Intel is back with a new and improved version of the platform. The new Intel vPro platform lets you do more of what you want and less of what you don't. So it's better for you and for your IT teams, who really are the backbone of keeping your work-from-home experience easy and enjoyable. I can safely say that the new vPro platform gives you more enterprise efficiency with less constraints. Visit intel.in/morewithvpro, that's VPRO, to discover how you can get more done with less waiting. If you're listening on the IVM Podcast Android app, click the link that's visible to you now.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the All Things Policy episode. And today I have Sunila with me. And I'm Sowmya. I head the corporate affairs at the Takshashila Institution. We're going to talk about the UN's guidelines on access to social justice for people with disabilities. So let's get started on this. Hi, Sunila. Welcome to the All Things Policy episode. And I'm glad we're going to discuss about the UN guidelines. And let's get started.
Thank you, Sowmya, for having me here on All Things Policy. Today, we'll be talking about the newly released guidelines by the United Nations for the persons with disabilities. These are the first ever guidelines on access to social justice for persons with disabilities, so that it makes it easier for them to access justice systems around the world.
Great.
These guidelines, they come with a set of 10 principles. The basic gist of these 10 principles is that all persons with disabilities have legal capacity and they cannot be denied access to justice. Second is that they have universal access to facilities and services. And here facilities and services refers to all the built environment and the social environment. So this refers to the built infrastructure and the social infrastructure that is available. And they are all entitled to all substantive and procedural safeguards. And the persons with disabilities, they have the right to participate in the administration of justice. And for all of this to happen, there should be effective and robust monitoring systems in the place. And the persons who are involved in the justice system, they must be provided with awareness raising and training programs addressing the rights of persons with disabilities, in particular in the context of access to justice.
Great. Now that you've laid out the UN guidelines broadly and certain principles, can you just elaborate a little more, Sunila, for our audience to understand what is the purpose of these principles?
So, the principles and guidelines, they actually pinpoint to the unequal access to justice, that is the consequence of bias, stigma, and the lack of understanding about persons with disabilities by officials in the justice system. So these principles are not intended to describe in detail a particular system of justice, rather drawing on the consensus of contemporary thought and actual experience. They seek to set out what is generally accepted as good practice in guaranteeing without discrimination equal and fair access to justice. So these principles, they are based on the UN's Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities.
All right. So since we spoke about, what are the things that go into the guidelines, you talked also about the built and the social infrastructure, the training, and how do you equip people to deal with this? Let's come to the, practical issues, right? What do the statistics in India say?
Yes, as per the census 2011, the proportion of persons with disability was 2.21% of the total population, which is around 2.68 crore persons, and in those and that 2.21% of the total population, 56% were males and 44% were females, and majority of that disabled population resided in rural areas, which is about 69%, and the remaining 31% resided in urban. And During the 2001 to 2011 time period, an increase in the number of disabled persons was observed both in rural and urban areas and also among males and females. Interesting thing to note here is that the percentage of population in rural areas is almost 3/4 of the total proportion of the population. So this is interesting thing to notice. Also, these are 2011 statistics. So, and right now we are in 2020. So, I'm assuming the proportion of population has increased a lot more than what it was in 2011.
Yeah, I mean, this is, interesting insight to say, how there is certainly a need for us to, have guidelines and also ensure we get these numbers right, because like you said, 2011 has 9 years back, right, the data that we're looking at. Okay, let's move on to the legal provisions of this so that it also helps us understand the framework better.
Yes, the government of India passed the landmark Right to Persons with Disabilities Act in 2016, which replaced the earlier Persons with Disabilities Act 1995. So this 2016 Act, it increased the quota of reservation for persons with disabilities from 3% to 4% in the government jobs and 3% to 5% in higher education institutions. The preamble of this act clearly states that it aims to uphold the dignity of every person with disability in the society and prevent any form of discrimination. The act also facilitates full acceptance of people with disability and ensures full participation and inclusion of such persons in the society. It defines persons with disability as any person with long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which on interacting with barriers hinder effective and equal growth in the society. The Act has sections on right to access to justice, which dictates that the appropriate government shall ensure that the person with disabilities can exercise the right to access any court, tribunal, authority, or any other judicial body. And the section on legal capacity states that the appropriate government shall ensure that persons with disabilities have rights equally with others to own or inherit property, to control their financial affairs, and to have access to bank loans, mortgages, or any other form of financial credit. So these are some of the few provisions which they have in the Right to Persons with Disabilities Act of 2016.
Great. So, Sunila, while you gave us insights about a few of the things from the 2016 Disabilities Act, has there been any change or have things improved, or it's just that the act is there by the side but things remain the same?
Yeah, that is an interesting question, Sowmya. So first of all, let's look at the causes of disability specifically in India. Okay, so there are two types of disabilities. First is like the disability is inborn, like you are born with a disability, and the second reason is that you get the disability during any point of your life. In the first case, which I mentioned, when a person is born with a disability, the reason is often the lack of good and accessible medical facilities, resulting in various medical complications for both the pregnant mother and unborn child, often leading to a disability for the child. And there have been many studies which have pointed out to correlation between disability and poverty. A large number of people with disabilities are born into poor households. And this cannot be just a mere coincidence, right? This is due to the fact that pregnant mothers have to work until the very late months of their pregnancy under very harsh conditions to make the ends meet. This lack of care due to systemic fallacies leads to medical complications during pregnancy, leading to birth of children with disabilities in many cases. Now, the Right to Persons with Disabilities Act of 2016, it proposes free healthcare in the vicinity, especially in rural areas subject to such family income as may be notified. And it also states that the state authorities shall do this within their economic capacity and development. So this is against the idea of providing rights, and it allows the state to absolve from its duty. So if we go by a rights-based approach, the access to healthcare should be irrespective of the income level. The states have to develop their capacity to provide healthcare services to persons with disabilities. It cannot, you cannot just say it should be within their economic capacity and development, right? And while the provisions of this act are all on paper, the actual situation in India is not that great. So, for example, they have increased the quota from 3% to 5% in the government jobs, but often it happens that no one is ready to actually hire people with disabilities because they think they will be a liability to their organization. They will have to spend more time in training them. But while rejecting them, they just state the reason as, they couldn't find a suitable candidate, or they didn't have enough qualifications or things like that. So this is what happens actually. So when the act was passed, the government of India came up with the Accessible India campaign, which was a flagship national program to make public buildings and transport less hostile for the physically challenged. And according to that campaign, 50% of all of these public buildings were to be made fully disabled friendly by July 2018. But more than 2 years after the launch of campaign, only 3% of buildings have become accessible, according to the Department of Empowerment of Persons with Disabilities. So at the launch of the campaign, they had identified 1,700 buildings to be made accessible to these persons, but it's just 3% of these buildings now. So you can imagine how difficult it is for persons with disabilities to even go about doing things in their daily life, which we actually take for granted as someone who is able to do all of these things.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, like you just said, the infrastructure or transport or your basic need for the day, even if that's compromised in giving access, because I actually know somebody whose child, had an accident and of course was disabled. So his spine had some issues and he was not mobile, and they had to move cities because the child wanted to study something and the colleges in Bangalore didn't have an option for him to kind of use his wheelchair access. So they had to move cities. So a lot of people have to make decisions which are life-changing because of lack of infrastructure and access, like you said, even transport and other things, right, which are fundamental for anybody to function in their routine.
Right. And it's not just, making these buildings accessible, like just providing ramps for the wheelchairs or providing bars for the people with visual disabilities. It also includes, modifying the signs so that they have braille symbols so that people with visual disabilities can actually understand what's written on them. All of these little things which add up to actually, improving the lives of persons with disabilities.
Yeah, of course, I think people are looking at audio guides and other things, but it's going to take time, and we are looking at only a marginal, improvement as of now. Although from 2016 we have had some sort of seriousness coming into it more because of the act. Looks like we look forward to probably be more sensitive towards these needs, and our infrastructure, which is upcoming, will probably factor in these. I'm sure there must be guidelines for all the infrastructure that's happening currently to abide by some of these things, right? So I'm hoping that we will have a more inclusive society soon.
Sure. Since the government of India has passed this act in 2016, we can always hope for greater inclusion for this section of the population in the society. I mean, let's just say it's the beginning, and we will have better things to see in the future. Also, while concluding, I would just like to say one thing that, we need to look at this population, at this section of population, from a rights-based point of view instead of charity-based point of view. Now, many people look at this from the charity point of view and they look at these people with sympathy. But we need to understand that these people do not need sympathy. These people need equal access to all the rights that are there in the Constitution of India and equal access to basic social services that are there for everyone else as well. So if we consider them on equal footing as us, I think that would be the right way to go.
Absolutely. I think the level of dignity that people would want, right, as human beings, I think that's what we need to strive for. In fact, even in a lot of corporates, they do, have policies which say as long as your technical requirements are met, it shouldn't matter, if the person has some challenges and especially able, but you should give them the job because at least it makes, that step of inclusion possible by, a marginal way. So I think as long as, employment opportunities and, careful thought in whatever we are kind of building right now is taken care of, we'll at least see some minor changes to come. And like you said, let's hope for the best.
Yes, I think the key is to draw a line between sympathy and empathy. So I guess that would help a lot.
So thank you so much, Sunila. I think it's given us few insights more as citizens to be a little more aware of these things and play a role in the individual capacity that we are in. And with this, we come to the end of today's episode. And I would like to tell our listeners that we have a series going on our events online. And this Friday, we have the upcoming China Challenge event. We're going to be discussing about securing freedom in the 21st century. And we have an interesting panel and the discussants. So we look forward to having you all join us for the event, and you could register for this on our website on the events tab. Thank you so much, Sunila, and thanks to all our listeners for being with us.
Thank you, Sowmya.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. It's been a really fun week this week, as it is almost every week, but this week was particularly fun. Farmisha Honey was on Cyrus Says, great conversation over there. We had a crossover event. Vineet Kanabar, host of the Storytellers and Storytellers podcast, came on Uncle Please Sit. Really interesting conversation about the future of digital content. Besides that, it was the 50th episode this week of Agla Station Adulthood. Congratulations to Ritasha and Ayushi. But yeah, they're 50 episodes down. They had Rekha Jha as the guest on that show. On Advertising is Dead, Varun had the founders of Foxy Moron, Suvir Bajaj and Pratik Gupta on. Another really, really interesting conversation. So full of interesting conversations this week, and I hope to see you again next week.
Namaskar, dear Bandhu. My name is Ashish Vidyarthi. These are truly challenging times, and in these times, we need hope. Do take time to listen to my podcast, Begin the Journey. Available on IVM Podcasts, website, app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Remember, there is hope because there's one life and we are alive.